Sony recently posted a notice that, as of December 31st, 2023, people will lose access to Discovery content they purchase through the PlayStation Store. This isn't just saying Sony will stop selling these shows. No, these shows will be removed from customers' video libraries. This has had people in an uproar. The internet is comparing it to a physical brick-and-mortar store coming to your house and forcibly taking back your DVDs and Blu-rays. Now, of course, that would be theft and entirely unacceptable behaviour, so surely this isn't legal, right? Surely this couldn't happen to our game libraries, right? Surely this is all the more reason to buy physical media, right? Well, as far as I can tell, we're kind of screwed on all three counts. First and foremost, this has happened before. Sony stopped selling TV and movie content via the PlayStation Store after the 31st of August 2021, although in that case customers could still access their content. Exactly 1 year later, German and Austrian PSN customers had Studio Canal titles forcibly removed from their libraries from the 31st of August 2022. The notice that was released is exactly the same as the Discovery one we're seeing now. But that's just movies, right? That hasn't happened to our games. Sure, licensed games, or even games with licensed cars, music, or actor likenesses, get delisted all of the time when those licensing deals expire, but as long as we purchase the game before it was delisted, we can still re-download it, right? While most would point to PT, a teaser for a revival of Silent Hill that sadly never came to fruition, gaming software that cannot be re-downloaded even if you previously had it, we also need to remember that that was a free demo. We never, air quotes, purchased it. I can't find precedent for any paid gaming content on the PlayStation Network, stuff that is already on your console's hard drive, being forcibly removed from people's libraries. Even the PlayStation Portable, whose store closed in 2016, still allows you to access your download list and re-download any previously, again air quotes, purchased games and DLC. That said, it doesn't mean that we can't lose access to our content, and there's a good reason that I keep saying air quotes purchased. Ultimately, we're not buying digital games. We are, at best, renting them. I'm going to continue using PlayStation as an example, because it's their removal of Discovery video content that prompted this discussion. However, similar terms apply to Microsoft, Nintendo, and even Valve's digital storefronts too. I'm also going to be referring to the UK's terms and conditions, because that's where I live. Generally speaking, the UK has better consumer rights and protections than the US, so it's relatively safe to assume that if we're screwed, then our American cousins are absolutely up shit's creek without a paddle. When you go through Sony's checkout, you're told that the transaction is subject to the PlayStation Network Terms of Service and software usage terms. Those software usage terms make it abundantly clear that we don't own anything. It reads, 4. Software is licensed. 4.1. When you purchase software, you are granted a license to use that software as described in these terms, but you do not acquire ownership of the software. If you do not comply with these terms, we can terminate the software license granted to you under these terms, which means you will no longer have the right to use the software. I don't think that could be any clearer. You don't own the game, you merely have permission to play it. Permission that can be taken away from you at any time. Even once you have the game, these terms restrict what you can do with what you've air quotes bought. Section 6, Limitations on your use of software, specifically 6.2, technically says that we can't broadcast or publicly perform games. Which is weird given PlayStation consoles have built-in YouTube and Twitch integrations. According to 6.3, we can't lend games to each other, despite Sony's famous jab at Microsoft many years ago. Hell, resale gets its own dedicated Section 7 that simply says we can't resell games, explicitly including disc-based games in that clause. Someone should tell Game, CEX, and eBay. Many of these terms are laughable, anti-consumer, potentially contradictory with the tools Sony themselves provide in the case of broadcasting gameplay, and clearly unenforceable, especially in the case of resale. Section 19, Your Rights and Our Liability, tries to address this. 19.1. As a consumer, you may have rights under applicable local laws that cannot be excluded, limited, or changed. Those rights take priority over anything in these terms, including in this Clause 19. So do any of these terms contradict our statutory consumer rights? As far as I can tell, with the exception of reselling physical games, no. Sadly, consumer law, and the law in general for that matter, is woefully behind the curve when it comes to the internet age. I'm not a lawyer or a legal expert, but everything I've looked at in my research says that Sony can remove access to our entire digital libraries at any time, and there's nothing we can do about it. Let's go back to our earlier comparison. While Sony can easily remove videos from our digital libraries, they can't come to our houses and take our physical DVDs and Blu-rays. So surely the same is true for our games. Just buy physical copies, problem solved, right? Kind of. Sadly, it's not quite that simple. Games have always had these terms, even before the internet age. We don't own the software on the disc, we have a limited license to use the software on approved hardware, with many of the same limitations and restrictions, such as no public performances, no right to resale, etc. Not to repeat too much of my physical is not preservation video, but those physical copies and the hardware we play them on aren't immortal. They are subject to wear and tear, damage, disk rot, dying disk lasers, failing hard drives, you name it. When it comes to modern games, we additionally have the problem that either not all of the content is on the disc, or the version on the disc does not represent the various patches, updates, and DLC the game has since received. Those updates sit on PlayStation servers, which are subject to the PlayStation Network Terms of Service. Meanwhile, the consoles we play them on have their own system software license. These are massive, boring documents in and of themselves, but essentially there is no guarantee that these downloads will remain available or that our consoles will continue to be supported. They can be discontinued at any time. In extreme examples, you might put in your first print physical copy of the Spyro Reignited trilogy, which only has the first of the 3 games on the disc, and find you simply can't download and access Spyros 2 and 3. This is worse on Switch, where most third-party titles require a download because the publisher used smaller capacity cartridges to save costs, and the full game simply isn't on there. This has already happened with Minecraft Story Mode. The games were delisted, could not be re-downloaded, and physical copies, which only had episode 1 on and triggered a download for the remaining episodes, can no longer trigger that download. Likewise, physical discs of Overwatch now just trigger a download for the free-to-play Overwatch 2, making those discs glorified coasters. Most games also now have their own end-user license agreement, or EULA, privacy policy, and terms of service that you have to agree to before playing the game. Many games require an online check-in to verify that you're playing a legitimate copy of the software, and we have too many single-player games that demand a constant internet connection to the publisher's server as a supposed anti-cheat measure. Some titles, especially on the Switch, are entirely cloud-based. You're effectively streaming the game from a remote server. Again, these publishers don't promise that these servers, and consequently your access to your game that you bought, physically or digitally, will always be there. You might go to fire up your favourite game and find that there's nothing to sign into, and you simply can't play it anymore. On the hardware and system software or firmware side of things, we're now living in an age where PlayStation 5 disk drives are detachable, which is great for repairability as disk drives are a common point of failure, but those drives need to complete a one-time online registration, which, again, might not always be available. Mandatory firmware updates likewise add and remove features which can impact our access to games stored on physical media. Is it harder to limit or remove our access to our physical disc-based games? Absolutely. Impossible? In more cases than we would like to think, no. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been a legal challenge or precedent set yet. This means that if it did end up in a courtroom, we don't know which way it could go. Again, not a lawyer, but I do find Sony's wording on their storefront to be misleading. At checkout, their website says confirm purchase. Not lease, not rent, not borrow, purchase. That word implies ownership. Likewise, if you try to buy a deluxe or Game of the Year edition of a game that you already bought the base version of, it says you already own another edition. Again, it doesn't say you've already licensed another edition, it specifically says own. I'm assuming Sony's defense would simply be that you have purchased a license. You own a license. You do not own the media itself, and that license can be revoked per the terms you agreed to during your purchase. Still, I think an argument could be made that Sony doesn't make enough efforts to explain that to the average person on the street. That what they reasonably believe they are paying for is not what they are actually getting. This is why I'm saying that, without a legal precedent from a real case, it's hard to say how this would play out. Another aspect for me would be the reputational damage and loss of consumer trust. Whoever goes first, be it Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Valve, or someone else, in saying, you are losing access to your digital games, is going to face one hell of a backlash and receive tons of negative press. Their customer base won't trust them with future digital purchases, and that opportunity cost, that depleted future revenue, may be enough to make these companies maintain our access to our content. I mean, arguably you could say that Stadia already did this and the floodgates are now wide open, but I would counter that Stadia was not playing in the same league as Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, and Valve. I've also heard arguments that are weirdly accepting of a seemingly inevitable loss of access. Life moves on, everything is transient, and nothing lasts forever. Yes, I have access to every Mega Drive game ever made on original hardware thanks to my EverDrive, but how many of those games do I actually want to play? The truth is, 9 times out of 10, I'm booting up the same handful of titles. How many games am I likely to return to? How many are one and done? Are our habits changing? For example, last week I downloaded Uncharted: The Lost Legacy from PlayStation Plus. Me and my wife beat it on the normal difficulty over 3 separate sessions in consecutive evenings. We then deleted it with no interest in doing higher difficulties, finding the collectibles, or trophy hunting. I mean no disrespect to Lost Legacy, it was a very good, incredibly fun game, but we're done with it. We had our fun, we've treated it as being very disposable. I can't realistically see us ever returning to it or playing it again. That's not to say people haven't connected with Uncharted Lost Legacy on a grander scale. It could be to someone else what Sonic 2, Batman Arkham Asylum, Die Hard Arcade, Burnout 3, Tomb Raider, Dead Rising, and Spyro the Dragon are to me, a repeated go-to that they know inside and out and regularly replay. It is to say that I have to consider how much of my personal time and energy I can devote to something that, ultimately, I have little to no say in and am only minorly inconvenienced by. Case in point, I was very concerned when the Wii U, PS3, and Vita digital storefronts were due to close. Yet, when I did my final browse of those virtual shops, I discovered that I had already bought, downloaded, and played anything I really wanted that badly a long time ago. There was little to nothing left that appealed to me. Anything still languishing on my wish list were titles that, ultimately, I didn't really want to put my money down for. Yes, that sucks for future generations who didn't have the opportunity to buy and play these games at the time. Sure, it's a problem for preservation and recording gaming's history. But when I consider my sphere of control and sphere of influence, I don't have the energy or ability to make a meaningful change. When I'm deciding whether to buy a game, I have to consider it as a perishable good, whether I like it or not, and I have to be happy to, air quotes, purchase it on those consumer-unfriendly terms, be that physical or digital. To go full circle back to video content, I recently wanted to rewatch Anohana, The Flower We Saw That Day. Sadly, it's been removed from Netflix. There is a Blu-ray collecting the entire series, but for $34.99, I decided I was happy for my experience with Anohana to have been transient. I didn't want to rewatch it that badly, even if it's a fantastic anime that I highly recommend. I'm finding that, as I get older, I'm having the same attitude towards games. I fully expect the comments will be heated. They always are on this topic. A lot of people seem to ignore the nuance, the grey areas, and instead present a very, let's say, passionate stance on the matter. I do ask that you try to be respectful of each other, to attempt to see each other's points of view, but I also expect that plea to go unheard. Thank you to my patrons, who are Crow, Tiny Jericho, Mr. Terry Chaos, Duckygo, and Francis T218. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider joining the Patreon, where from as little as £1 a month, you can get access to early scripts and raw audio recordings. You can also support the channel for free by liking, commenting, and subscribing. There's over 10 years of content on the channel, so there are bound to be other videos that you'll enjoy, as well as new stuff to look forward to. I'm currently working on a Batman Arkham retrospective, with Arkham City being up next.